Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here on time, online or in person. Just a reminder, next week there will be no class. We are in the middle of chapter 30. Just very briefly, the rabbi main theme of this chapter is to allow the person to eradicate the evil soul which grab holds of the person and does not allow him to connect to God. In chapter 29, it was more internally, to scream at myself, to humble myself. In chapter 30th, the concentration is comparing me outwards with other people, to other people. And the main theme of this chapter is me'od, very, very much. Evei shfal ruach, be humble, bifnei kol adam, in front of every human being. The Hasidic teaching, this revelation of the Alter Rebbe, sounds very difficult to achieve, but actually elevates the person, frees them from all the bound of strings that bind the person from connecting to people, from living a happy life. And let me explain. We need to realize, says the Alter Rebbe, anytime you meet someone, he is greater than you. There are 4 categories usually in which we like to compare ourselves to others. In our IQ, in our standing in the community, in our financial achievements, and in our spiritual connection to God. The Alter Rebbe says that whenever you meet someone, he's not equal, but better. Because had he been given the talents, the family, the community, the surrounding that I was, he probably would have done much better. And that includes, and this is what the rabbi is busy with, kal shebakalim. Kal means a very light spiritually, someone who is far removed from God, but kal shebakalim means the lightest of the light. Someone who is the farthest that you can imagine from God. When I face that person, I need to treat that person as a person who is greater than me, achieving more than I am, closer to God, greater person in potential and in actuality. It's not fake, it's for real. The Rebbe is not saying imagine. The Rebbe is not saying consider for the moment. The Rebbe is not saying maybe you should think to yourself when you treat or speak to the person as if he is. No. The Rebbe is saying that every single human being I meet and encounter is because that person is going to teach me something, and that person is greater than me. Therefore, I'm happy to communicate. I'm happy to assist. I'm happy to give attention in my time. I'm happy to be around that person. Does it mean that we can be inspired by a person to misbehave? Of course not. Does it mean that we don't have to do that much in our service of God? Of course not. But it means that we are not allowing our ego to stand in the middle of our relationship to others. And that's the main theme of the chapter. The first part we spoke about is the positive commandments. The rabbi explains that when I perform the good, how is it possible I go to jail, I go to prison to visit inmates? Someone committed a murder, a rape, a serial killer. How is it possible for me to consider myself lower than that person that is greater than me? So the Rebbe is breaking into 2 parts. The first one we study, which is the positive. The Rebbe says, what made that person sin? It is his evil inclination, because he was creating the same way I was creating. He was born in a hospital, I was born in a hospital. He had a father and mother, I have a father and mother. He went to school and I went to school. He made bad choices. Or that he was created in a way that temptation is much stronger for him. But the fact that he made those choices is because he gave in to the evil impulse. Says the Rebbe, hold it for a moment and let's see, how do you deal the evil impulse? Do you really do mitzvot, positive commandments, the way God wants us to? When you pray to God, are you concentrating in the prayer and serving God with prayer the way God desires? Of course not. The only reason is because we're giving up to our evil impulse. When I give tzedakah, am I giving as much as I should? When I do blessings before food or after food, do I really think for a moment God gave me teeth? God gave me tasting buds. God gave me the ability to chew and swallow and thank you, Hashem, when you say the prayer. I don't know about you, but I don't. I rarely think. I just say it by rote. I was raised that way. I know it's the right thing. I do a mitzvah. I'm getting reward by God. Of course, I'm getting reward, but you do the way for the way it should be done is serving God, appreciating. And the reason we don't do it is because the evil impulse, the animal soul, is putting me to sleep. It says, "Come, don't think about it. Think about the stock market. Think about how you're going to travel to Miami. Think about how's your car doing. Think about all other businesses in the world except what you're supposed to be doing right now." And that's because you have an evil pulse, evil impulse, the animal soul, who takes over you, controls you. Says the Rebbe, in what way you think you're better than that person? That person acted out of this evil impulse, allowing the animal soul to control him. And we do mitzvot, we pray, we eat kosher, we do pray, we study Torah, but we don't do it the way God desires us to be. And therefore, when I see someone, when I socialize, when someone asks for advice, when I'm able to bond with somebody, don't look at it from top to bottom. Oh, I study every day Torah, I pray every day. This guy rarely prays. He goes to synagogue only once a year. Or that person is in prison. Or that person doesn't speak Hebrew. Therefore, he does not connect to God. Perhaps that person is in a whole different ballgame, in a much closer relationship with God. And the reason that he is where he is, he or she, is because, just like me, giving in to their evil impulse, giving in to the animal soul. Did I make myself clear? Last week, we got a little entangled about reward and doing it right. I just want to, I was busy thinking about it for at least 2 days. And I couldn't figure out how best to express other than just the way I say it now. When I serve God and I keep kosher and I pray to God, we get reward. We get the reward for it. We're dedicating ourselves for God's sake. When we study Torah, even if my head is not in the right place, but there is a much better way of serving God, which is concentrating on what I say, doing it the way God wants it to be done. Unfortunately, most of the time, again, I cannot speak about people around here, I'm speaking about myself, it's not done right. The only excuse, the only explanation it's not done right is because I'm giving in to the evil soul. Had I not been, had I had a fight against the evil soul, it wouldn't be done that way. It would have been done a lot better. Therefore, someone who is in a very, very different situation is not necessarily any worse than where I am. I hope I made myself clear. Now the Rabbi is going to talk about the negative, the negative precepts, the prohibitions that God gave us. Again, comparing it to somebody else who on the outside looks like he is worse off than I am. I just want to share a story. Now, this story I did not share with you because I was debating whether I should say it, and I do feel it will help understanding, it will drive the message home. If I share a story that you heard already from me, please stop me. But the story, there is a famous, the Baal Shem Tov, when he came out to reveal the teaching of the Hasidic teaching, The way he did was he would go into a Jewish community like Brody, like Kherson, like Poltova, and come into the center of town where the marketplace was. Everybody who was in the town, in the center of town, he would take a milk crate. He would take a box, stand up and start clapping and inviting people to listen, and he would start sharing stories. He was an extremely talented, and he was able to captivate the audience with stories. The stories is what changed people, and the stories are what made him Hasidim, had him followers. There is a famous rabbi of a community. He is known as Baal Toldot. Toldot because he wrote a book begins with the word Toldot. Toldot is descendants. How did he become a Chassid of the Baal Shem Tov? He was a non-Chassid. He was opposing the Hasidic movement. And one day, the Baal Shem Tov came to his town. And when the Baal Shem Tov was in his town, he stood on a box and he was telling stories. And all the Jewish people who were standing and listening, they were mesmerized. Came Mincha, came afternoon service, and the synagogue is empty. Where's everybody? So he goes to the sexton, to the Gabbai, and says, where's everybody? And the Gabbai says, on the way here to open up the synagogue and to turn on the heat, I saw a stranger, a visitor, came to town. He's standing in the middle of the road, and everybody's around. He's telling him stories. So the rabbi tells the Gabbai, go back to the marketplace and tell people it's time to daven. It's time for prayer. They come to synagogue. The Gabbai goes there, and before he starts speaking, he puts his ears to listen. And he lost it. He got caught with the story, and he did not return. The Baal told the rabbi, now the Gabbai is not there, figured he himself has to go and check it out. So he goes there, and he heard the story, and the story made him change and become a chassid. Here is the story that he heard. The Baal Shem Tov today, to me, it's after so many years of Hasidic upbringing, it's obvious, but at the time it was something new. The Baal Shem Tov told the following story. There was a man, he was a porter. He was a carrier of appliances. You know, when I grew up, how do you get the refrigerator up second story? You have a porter, someone they put on the back and they walk with it. I still today, I needed a washer into the mikveh. We have those Russians that are here. They have the cables and a little device. And one puts it in and it bends, and the other helps him, and that's how they carry it. They walk with it. This guy was a porter, never studied Torah, but he feared God. He couldn't even pray. He would come to synagogue and sometimes shed tears. How come he cannot pray like everybody else? Because what he can make of the prayer was only a fraction of the prayer. He would read very few chapters. He had a neighbor, next door neighbor, who was a scholar, someone who was raised in a very wealthy home. They hired a teacher. They taught him Hebrew. He was studying Gemara. So when he would come to synagogue, he would come a little bit earlier to study Talmud. The other guy would come to synagogue and hear the stories of Ein Yaakov. Ein Yaakov is a book that's published about 400 years ago that summarizes or calls the stories of the Talmud in a very beautiful, simple way in Yiddish. And the rabbis would teach it between Mincha and Ma'ariv, between afternoon and evening service, for people who couldn't read the Talmud. So you would show them the stories that's easy to understand. So that's all. That's the summary. So to sum up, his Torah study was the Talmudic stories that he heard between Mincha and Ma'ariv from the rabbi. The scholar, the neighbor, studied Talmud before. Between Mincha and Ma'ariv, he studied more Talmud. He just enjoyed honor from the community, from members. One day they both walked home. They walked together after evening service. And the porter let out a sigh. aside because of where he stands spiritually. He wished he would had the parents who cared about his education. He wished his head was a little more open to understanding the Torah, so he let out aside. His neighbor, upon hearing that, laughed and mocked him inside, in his heart. Says, who am I? Who is he compared to me? We are in two different classes. We're two different groups of people. And each one entered a home. After 120, says about Shem Tov, they both went up to heaven. And the scholar, they died about the same time. The scholar came up to heaven, and in the heavenly court, they put together on the scale, they have a scale with good deeds and negative deeds, bad deeds. And they put on the scale all the pages of Talmud and all the good deeds that he did. But then the prosecutor brought in the sigh that he mocked the neighbor and put it on the other side. And that sigh was so heavy that it outweighed all the good study and all the good deeds he did. Unfortunately, you know where he ended. Then came the poor man. And the misdeeds, the sins that he committed were plenty because he didn't know. He didn't know how to keep Shabbat. He didn't know how to watch kosher. There are things he didn't know because he didn't learn. But so they were very light. However, so the negativity was very. However, the sigh, he let out a sigh one day. That sigh at that time was put on the positive scale, on the positive side, and it was so powerful that it outweighed everything, and he went straight to heaven. And the Baal Shem Tov said that it's not about the outcome, the results. Some people reward us based on the outcome. God rewards us on our efforts, the efforts. And therefore, the scholar, the efforts, the way he mocked down somebody did not discredit it. But the other guy, because his effort, he was feeling sorry for himself, that added so that he was considered a great man before God. This is what got the Baal Toldot, the rabbi of that town, very famous town, to become a chassid of the Baal Shem Tov. It captured them. And he realized it's not about how many pages of Talmud you study. And it means not necessarily how much Torah you know. It's all about how much effort are you putting. And if you distance yourself and you think you're different than other persons, or you're better than those persons, perhaps it's going to work against us. That's what the rabbi is telling us here. That the effort is what counts. And therefore, if I am a great scholar, I was raised with the Hebrew language, and I follow the Torah to the best of my ability. When I meet someone, it's not necessarily that I'm ahead of the game from that person, because that person may let out sighs, may feel sorry for the way he lives his life, and regret his behavior and wish he did more, and that would put him way ahead of me. And therefore, me'od hevei shval ruach b'fnei kol adam, we need to know that the Hasidic teaching begins with humbling ourselves and in front of everybody. Just before we get to one more short story, there was a rabbi actually, who passed by the dollars of the Rebbe, every Sunday, and he told the Rebbe, I'm a complete Hasid, because I study Tanya every week, and I study a whole chapter of Tanya so I'm a complete Hasid. And the Rebbe said to him, this is a self-contradiction, because a Hasid is never complete. And if you're complete, you cannot be a Hasid. In other words, if we are to be servants of God, if we are to be trying to be close to God, to say that I'm complete, to say that I'm great, to say that I'm better than others, is exact. We do the exact opposite. Let's talk about the negativity, because I want to finish chapter today. Page 411. So just like in the positive, the rabbi used examples. What were the examples? Prayer, blessings before and after the meal, food, tzedakah, study of Torah. These are the examples. Rabbi says if you dissect it and go through the details, you find that you're not necessarily doing it properly because the evil impulse is running the show for you. Now the Rabbi in the negativity also is going to show us that we're not that perfect. And the Rabbi is going to use simple examples. Page 411 on top. Even in the category of turn away from evil, every thinking man can discover within himself that he does not turn completely and totally away from evil. In a situation requiring a battle of the level, that is, magnitude described above, that is, the battle required of the Baal Akal Shebakalim, or even in a situation requiring a battle of a lesser magnitude. The Rabbi is saying, those men who are much farther from me in their conduct to serve God, they face such great harsh challenges that I do, if I have less, even a small part of their challenge, I fail. And therefore, it's no way that I can put them below me. For example, he may find that he does not summon up the strength to stop in the middle of a pleasant gossip or in the middle of relating a tale discrediting his fellow. How many times if we start speaking and we realize we are gossiping or slandering, we stop. It's very hard. Again, I'm not speaking about anybody here. I'm talking about myself. It's very hard. You know why? The animal soul wants you to sin. Are we able to stop? No, we enjoy. We want people to appreciate the story, to learn from us something. We get honor. Says the Rebbe, those people who are far from God, they are in the same situation, except that their passion for sin, their temptation for sin is 10 times harder. And therefore, if I don't blame myself when I share gossip or slander, how much more so I shouldn't blame those people for their conduct? As he ought to do, even if it is a very slight slur, and even if it be true, and even though his purpose in relating it is to exonerate himself, as is known, I'll explain it in a moment, as is known from what Rabbi Shimon said to his father, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda, concerning a problematic bill of divorce that was improperly written. He said to him, I did not write it. Yehuda the tailor wrote it, where the slur was a minor one and the purpose was self-vindication. And yet his father replied, keep away from slander. Note there in the Gemara, Tractate Baba Batra, beginning of chapter 10. And let me explain you. Says the Rebbe, there is a story in the Talmud. Anybody heard of the word get? Get. A bill of divorce is get. Why is it called get? 12 lines? Okay, get, gimel, and tet. There is another one, and that is the word get is the separating letter from beyachad. Beyachad means together. Beyachad. 4 letters. Bet, Yud, Chet, Daled. What separates them? Between Bet and Chet, you have, I'm sorry, between Bet and Daled, you have Gimel. Yud and Chet, you have Tet. Harry, you got it? Yeah. Oh, that's why you come here. Beyachad is 4 letters. If you put them in order, you have Bet, Dalet, Chet, Yud. Gimel is between Bet and Dalet, and Tet is between Chet and Yud. But there is another reason. In the entire Torah, 5 books of Moses, you will not find the letters Gimel and Tet next to each other in any combination. 2 words next to each other, in the middle of a word, at the end of the word, a word by itself. The word get, the letters get, Gimel Tet, will never be together next to each other in the Torah. Because get is separation, and the Torah is about unity. In ancient times, there was a complex way of write. Some people would write a get in a very complex way. Here is the way they did it. I just like to share it so that you have an idea that in ancient time they had it much more complex than today. They would write a line, fold it, sew it, and then write another line. Fold it again, sew it, and write another line, sew it again. That's called get mekushar. Get that is bound, that is tailored. This way, it is safer form against the elements, against rain, even if it's outdoors with ash, with kinds of bugs that eat parchment. One day, Rabbi Yehuda, who was the leader, opened up such a get. So you have to untie the strings and open. It's layer after layer, and the date was missing. Now, the date is the most crucial part of a get. Why? Because if the girl is divorced today, from today, and if she'd been sleeping with a man from a day before, she was married at the time. That's different than if she found to be secluded with a man after the date. So a date is the most crucial part of a get. When a husband divorces his wife, the date is the most crucial part. The date, the name, there are a few that are called Torah get. Torah get means the most crucial part, but among them, the date is most important. They couldn't find the date. So Rabbi Shimon, his son, turned to him and says, maybe in one of those foldings, the date is found there. It's just that it wasn't visible when they undid it. And they actually looked and they found the date. But Rabbi Yehuda said, I don't understand why they did it so complex. Why didn't they write the get the way a get is written in 12 lines, as Harry said? Just the proper way, writing line after the line. Why do they have to do it in the complex way? So Rabbi Shimon, the son who brought the get, who delivered the get, assumed, and I believe correctly, that Rabbi Yehuda was upset at him. Why did he make matters so complex? So he said, I didn't do it. Yehuda Chaita, Yehuda the tailor, he was a scribe. He's the one who did it. And his father turned to him and says, what? Gosh, don't say that. It's called gossip. It's called slander. It's forbidden. You should say, I didn't do it. You don't have to tell us who did it. In other words, over there, he did it to exonerate himself, to vindicate himself from the wrath of his father. And he told the truth. He did not make up stories. And there was nothing wrong about what he said. Yet, he should have not mentioned the name. The Gemara brings another example right then and there. A while later, they looked at the get. And the handwriting was very beautiful. A very, very nice handwriting. So the father, Rabbi Yehuda, turned to his son, Rabbi Shimon, and says, this writing is very beautiful. And Rabbi Shimon says to him, I didn't write it. Yehuda Chaita, Yehuda the scribe wrote it. And his father says to him, why are you saying that? It's gossip. It's called an iota of gossip. The Gemara goes on to say that even though all he did was speak the truth and he was saying something positive, the problem with that is once you start speaking about the person, it can lead to negative speaking. And therefore, his father told him, you should have not done that. In other words, the Rebbe did everybody, Ali, do you understand the story? Okay. So in other words, gossip, slander, lashon hara, is something that is the temptation is so great. And the reason we don't hold back from it is because we give into our impulse. So, Rabbi, how is it possible for me to judge someone and say, I'm greater than him because I'm not a sinner like him? How do you say that? Perhaps we are greater sinners than that person. And for that, I have a story for you.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
but why it doesn't they get no marriage is
The date?
the same way as the get of divorce.
What? Why isn't? I didn't hear.
The, they take the get of divorce and
They do
save
it. Why? Because the Torah said so. The Torah tells us that marriage can be done in any of the three ways. One of them is with a contract. Divorce must be by a contract, by a piece of document. So therefore, they did it in different ways. Today, we do it very simple. You take a piece of parchment, you write, as Harry mentioned, 12 lines. By the way, 12 lines became because the get is 12, but it's not a necessary. If a get was written in 4 lines or 7 lines or 15 lines, it's still kosher. The story I want to share with you is the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek. When he got old, it was hard for him to speak and to teach Hasidic teaching. So what he would do, he would write it down. And he would write it down, and on Shabbat, he would have the paper, I think, and he would read from the paper. It was much easier for him. Every Friday, he would go to the mikveh in the afternoon, as is customary by Hasidim. While he was going to the mikveh, one of his grandchildren would sneak into his chamber, to his private room, and read through the teaching of what he wrote. So he can hear, when he hears it from the Rebbe, he already read it, so it's much easier for him to digest. After doing so a few times, the Rebbe, even though he was an old man, noticed that someone is in his office while he leaves for the mikveh. So he figured he has to put a stop to it. How does he put a stop to it? He turned to his wife and he says, when I'm going to the mikveh, I need you to sneak in quietly before I leave. Stay here. And then watch who comes in. And when they come in, you'll let me know. And they wouldn't know that you're there. He didn't know who it was, as a family member or a chassid. Anyway, so she sat down there, and this young grandson walked in on her. Now, she was a very stern person. So when he saw her, he feared that she's going to curse him, at least, because she was there to watch who enters, and he was there. So in a quick second, he came up with a reason. He turned to her, he says, I'm glad I found you. I was looking for you because I have a dilemma. I'm facing a dilemma. What's the dilemma? She turned to him. He said to her, my wife, he was a young man, my wife just went to the market to buy fish. She found, you understand it's a Baba right? She found a very beautiful fish, and she turned to the merchant, the fisherman, and says, I would like to buy it because she comes from the royal family. And the merchant said to her, I'm sorry, I don't sell it to you because I sell this fish only to very special families. He referred to very wealthy people. In other words, I believe that he couldn't ask from a young lady so much money as much as he wanted. So he refused to sell. This was a very special fish. Maybe it was a pompano. So she got very upset because she was willing to pay. He refused to sell it to her. So she came home. He said she came home. She's crying that she went to buy fish and people disrespect her, don't treat her properly. And he said to her, I don't know what to do. I'm wondering if you have a suggestion. So now he was hoping she will give him an answer and he'll be able to sneak out. So she will say, nobody was there. But she says, oh gosh, these people in this town, they have no respect for families. It's not only you, they disrespect me. When I go to the market, so the merchants don't have any respect. And she went on and on and on. Suddenly the Rebbe shows up. He comes back. So the Rebbe sees them having a conversation. So he turned to him, he turned to her, and he said, "What's going on?" So he said to the Rebbe, "We were discussing the merchants in town in Lubavitch, how awful they are with the disrespect." And the Rebbe turned to him and he said, "Don't say that, because this is Lashon Hara. This is slander. Why are you engaging in slander?" And the Rebbe went on to explain to him, and he said, "I want you to know that that's the way judgment up in heaven goes. They show you, they bring you to a situation with other people in a certain way, and they ask you to reach a verdict on those people. And by doing so, you actually reaching a verdict on yourself. In other areas of life, in other periods of life, you will be acting the same way. So in order for you to agree to the judgment, to the ruling, you have the same situation. Therefore, Lashon Hara, says the Rebbe to him, is not about benefiting the person you're speaking about. It's for your own sake. Because if you train yourself not to speak about others, even though it's the truth, you're actually preventing yourself from reaching a verdict about your own behavior. Ali, did you understand? Ali, did you understand?
Yeah, there goes practice. You asked the person who's going to look at the stuff, he didn't know who it was.
I knew somebody was gonna. I guess he didn't catch, yeah. I believe that when I read, I was thinking to myself, did he catch or not? I believe that the Rebbe knew full well what was going on, but it was his grandson, so he had mercy. That's what I think.
He probably thought he was lower than his grandson, so he didn't want to say anything.
Huh?
He believed he was lower than his grandson, so he didn't want to say anything.
Okay, very good. I love your ingenuity. So that's why Rabbi Yehuda tells his son Rabbi Shimon, Klach milashon hara. Ran away from slander. Who asked you to say the name? Say, I didn't write it, so I won't be upset at you. When you see a beautiful writing, say, I didn't do it. It's not me, it's somebody else, but without mentioning the name, because once you name a person, somebody says, oh, other times he wasn't so, his writing is not so nice, etc. And you don't know how far it's going to go. And it's for our own benefit. But back to our discussion, the Rebbe says, whenever we face a challenge, a temptation, we are not big tzaddikim. We're not perfect. If I have the desire now to speak slander, it's very hard to stop me. So how can you judge someone for getting addicted or misconduct? They also had a temptation, and their temptation, says the Rebbe, as we'll find out in a moment, is 10 times stronger. So therefore, there is no place for judgment. There is no place for saying that I am above them, because we're not. The same applies to very many similar things which occur frequently. Page 412. There too, one will find that he does not resist his evil impulse as ought to, even in the category of turn away from evil. This is especially true with regards to sanctifying oneself by refraining from indulgence in permitted matters. And this is a biblical commandment derived from the verse, you shall be holy and sanctify yourself. The Rebbe says that even if you are allowed to, we need to sanctify ourselves. We cannot indulge in food. We cannot indulge in physical pleasure just for the sake of pleasure. God gave it to us to enjoy on Shabbat, on specific days. But just going on and on and on is forbidden. The reason we do it is because we give in to our temptation. Moreover, even according to the opinion of that this commandment is not a biblical origin, yet rabbinic enactments are even stricter than biblical laws. And one will often find himself succumbing to self-indulgence when the temptation is strong and requires a battle to overcome it. And we do not fight that battle, we give up right away. Even if it's not a Torah decree, it's a rabbinic enactment. In many ways, the rabbinic enactments are much stronger, much more important than the biblical law, as is mentioned in the Torah. And the reason we are giving up is because we don't try even to fight it. But all these and similar matters are among the sins which people trample underfoot, insensitive to their importance, and which have come to be regarded as permissible because they are committed repeatedly. We commit sins. Again, I'm not speaking about anybody in particular, I'm speaking about myself. We end up committing a sin daily, continuously, just because we have done that so many times, we don't realize there's something wrong. And for that, I have a story. One time, the Rebbe was sitting, not Hasid, not the Lubavitcher Rebbe, another Rebbe, and there was a man that was limping. Unfortunately, his leg wasn't healthy. So one guy shouted, "Hey, limper!" They called him the limper. Everybody called him, "Can you pass the herring?" And the Rebbe upon hearing, he says, "How dare you call someone with that derogatory name?" And the man answered the Rebbe, "Everybody calls him that way." And the Rebbe turned to him and he says, "Hell is big enough for everybody. There is enough room for everybody." In other words, there is no justification. Unfortunately, everybody does it. Today, science proves, psychology proves that we will steal, disrespect, trample on others' property if everybody else does it. Anybody read those studies that are recently? In other words, that the herd, the community will dictate how we view misconduct. And the Rebbe is taking it about the person himself. If I learn to disrespect my father, unfortunately, and my father was kind enough once, twice, 3 times, then it becomes normal. That's the way, because I always do it. My friends never dare spoke to their parents the way I did, because the parents were very stern. My father was very soft, very, very loving. One time my friend saw the way I spoke and he said, "How dare you? First, my father would slap me, and in addition, it's a sin." I said, "I don't understand why it's a sin. I do it all the time." That's a justification. But in essence, we are giving into our impulse. And therefore, there is no place to judge someone who has committed a grave sin. And even if they are put in jail or they have an addiction, it doesn't mean that they are far less than we are. It doesn't mean he's farther from us, farther from God than we are. All the above mentioned calculations then can lead to one to conclude that he is no better than the Kal Shebakalim, the one that is the farther in his action from God. Like the Kal Shebakalim, he too fails to wage war against his evil impulse when it is required of him. Yet this still does not explain the requirement that one considers oneself lower than every man. In what way is he worse than the Kal Shebakalim? In answer, the Alter Rebbe continues. So until now, the Rebbe says, don't put yourself above anybody else, no matter how far they are from God, no matter how little of service to God they are. But the Rabbi goes on to say that we are in a state lower than they are. How is it possible to be lower? We can say we are equal, but how can you say lower? And that's what the Rabbi is going to address now. Says the Rabbi. In truth, however, if he is a scholar and upholds God's Torah and wishes to be close to God, his sin is unbearably great and his guilt is increased manifold, for he is not waging war and not overcoming his impulse in a manner commensurate with the quality and nature of the war mentioned above that the Kal Shebakalim must face. Says the Rebbe, if you put those two people, a person who is raised to the tradition, studies Hebrew, goes to synagogue every day, then the expectation is way, way more. So when both the one who is addicted, the one who is in prison, the one who never shows up to synagogue, he does not serve God, versus the one who is close to God in the way he was upbringing and his knowledge. When they both misbehave, they both allow the evil impulse to control, the one who is with the tradition and with the background farther below, far away than the other person who did not have the upbringing. I think it's common sense. I don't need to elaborate, but I'm going to show you a story to that. Yeah, we can show the story of this time. His guilt is far greater than the guilt of the culture bakalim, the most worthless of the street corner squatters who are remote from God and His Torah. So if you have two people steal, you have a rabbi who steals, or you have someone, a squatter, someone who is a homeless, who is going to bring more shame to himself and family? The rabbi. Why? They both acted, they both stole, they both shoplifted the same amount, a sweater or $10. But the one who is has the knowledge and was brought up with the proper education, you have higher expectation. Says the Rebbe, when you have a person who is plain and is a scholar and he studies Torah and is allowing or is giving into evil impulse, is farther removed from God. He caused a lot more strife and pain to God than someone who does not. And I have a story for that. There was a famous Chassid who was murdered by the Nazis, very holy man. He was considered the Beinoni of the Tanya, Rabbi Yitzchak Matmid. Rabbi Yitzchak Matmid. When he got married, you have to understand, he studied, by the way, he's the uncle of Leonard Rivkin. Leonard Rivkin's mom is his sister, was his sister. Leonard Rivkin, we have a man who comes here. He's always studied in yeshiva. He didn't know nothing from the outside world, but he knew how to respect other people. He got married, and as soon as they got married, they needed to buy furniture, he and his wife. So they traveled to St. Petersburg, I think, or to Moscow, to a big town, and they found pre-revolution, or just after. And they discovered, they went to a department store to buy furniture, to buy a bedroom. So they walk into the first story, first floor, and a salesman approached them. This is all in Russia. And they said their young couple just got married in a bedroom. So the guy showed them a nice, simple bedroom set for 500 rubles. But while they're looking, the wife said to him, I'm going up to see other stuff, what's going on, what else is available. So after a while, she didn't come back. He decided to look for her. And he goes up and up and up to all the stores, all the stories, all the floors. He finds her in the 5th floor, looking at fancy, very beautiful, with design, with ornaments, etc., different sets of bedrooms. So he turned to a salesman and says, how much is this set over here? And the guy says to him, 5,000 rubles. So he said, why, 10 times? 10 times? I saw 500. So the guy says, obviously, because what you saw there is from IKEA, and this one is handmade from an antique oak that is used by the Tsar for 7 generations, and was hand carved and real gold plated. And the guy is giving him the whole Megillah. Why is it worth 500? We know, custom made, and it will last for 5 generations. So the guy turned to his wife. Obviously, it's beyond their budget. They didn't have the budget. So before they leave in, the salesman says to the couple, but by the way, the side room next to right there, you can find the same set for half the price, for 2,500, for 2,500 rubles. Really? He says to his wife, let's look. They go in, they see the similar, but real material. For it says over there, the tag is 2,500 rubles. So they go to the salesman and they say, why is it half the price? Harry, why is it half the price? because it was damaged goods. There was some scratches. It's called the scratch department section. So the salesman points out that there were many, many small scratches that diminished the value. So it's 2,500. So he says to his wife, let's go downstairs and we can find a set exact for 250 because you're laughing, right? He says that here we found with scratches for half the price, right? So we're gonna go, the downstairs set was 500. Let's ask him for the, what do you call it, dent section or scratch section, and find one set for 250. So the salesman says to them, sorry, the downstairs 500, even if it has scratches, it's still 500. It's not going to change. So I said, why? He says, well, because the other one was, as I said, was an IKEA. It was a simple sandwich board made out. So the value, this is so inexpensive, so dents and scratches still keeps the value the same as it is. But up here, the fifth floor, if it is so beautifully made, carved, handmade by craftsmen, every small scratch affects the price. And therefore, you find with dents for half the price. And he learned from it, Rabbi Yitzchak Masmid, later on shared that he discovered three things, which I'm not going to share tonight, but I want to apply it for our situation. When you have someone who gives in to his temptation, and he's a 5,000 set bedroom, little dents, little misbehaving has a major, major impact. But when you have someone who did not have the upbringing and does not read the Hebrew and does not come to synagogue, is not aware of the art they do, and they give in to their temptation, it still does not diminish the value. The 500 will stay 500. Maybe you get a $10 off, 10 ruble off, but you'll still pay the full amount. That's the idea the Rabbi is saying. Therefore, we are lower than other people. The Rabbi says, if you take a true accounting of you, I'm talking about myself, about my own life, when I see someone who is far removed from God, someone who is much, much less connected to God and in an open way, I am not just equal to that person, but I'm farther removed from God than that person, because that person gives in to his temptation, and I give in to my temptation. I'm not a perfect man. I do not obey all the prohibitions, but in addition, when I disobey, it comes at a much higher price. I am causing a lot more pain to God than the other person. I want to finish the chapter. The guilt for not summoning up the fear of God, who knows and sees all their actions in order to restrain their impulse, which burns like a fiery flame, is not as heinous as the guilt of one who draws ever nearer to God, his Torah, and his service. As our sages of blessed memory said of the apostate Acher, Elisha ben Avuya, because he knew my glory, said God, if despite this he still sinned, his guilt is far greater. Let me just explain that very briefly. There was a man, very great sage, one of the most profound sages in his time, a colleague of Rabbi Akiva, by the name of Elisha ben Avuya. Some of his teachings appear in Ethics of Our Fathers, one of his teachings. But he became a heretic. He experienced during the before that, during the destruction of the temple, the Romans destroyed the temple and murdered very brutally a lot the sages, and he saw it, and it was something that bothered them to an extreme that he left the Torah and left everything. His student is Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir, who wrote all the Mishnah. He's his student. And they used to study together. One day on Shabbat, he was riding a horse. You're not supposed to ride a horse on Shabbat because just like you're supposed to rest, your animals have to rest. By the way, all of us who have pets should take note. You're not allowed to enslave or to walk the animals on Shabbat. So you're not allowed to ride a horse on Shabbat. Acher, his name is Acher, a stranger. He was riding a horse. Rabbi Meir was walking by him because he wanted him to study Torah with him. They walked together. After a while, Acher turned to him and he says, "Stop! It's Shabbat. On Shabbat you can walk 2,000 feet, 2,000 steps." And we just read 2,000 steps. So for you who keep Shabbat, you shouldn't go any farther. In other words, despite the fact that he was deeply involved in the teaching of Torah, he was such a brilliant mind that he knew exactly when 2,000 steps were ended, and he told Rabbi Meir, his student, don't go anymore. I keep going. So Rabbi Meir turned to him and says, I don't understand. Why aren't you realizing it's time for you to return? Why don't you coming back? And Acher, Elisha ben Avuya, said to him, and it's in the Talmud. This is the quote from the Talmud. He says, one day I walked in the back of the temple on Yom Kippur. The temple, I believe, was already destroyed, but he went in the back side of the temple, and I heard an echo, a heavenly echo that shouted, please, my sons, return back to me, except Elisha ben Avuya, except me. And the Gemara says the reason so he says to Rabbi Meir, I have no way of returning because God himself sends a message, everybody should return except me. And the Gemara says the reason that God says except, even though there is no way God would reject him, but that God said he will not assist him. But that's not the topic here. What the rabbis say, why did God say that? And the reason is because he got so close to God. When he rejected the Torah, he went very, very far from God, to a point that God did not want him back. Still, he could have come back, but that was his choice. However, the reason the echo came from heaven, everyone, my children, return back to me except Elisha, says the Gemara, because he knew God so much, so deep, better than anybody else, and yet he made the wrong choice. So what the rabbi is making here is that the closer we are to God, when we make the wrong choice, we go farther than others. And therefore, we need to consider ourselves, and myself, lower than any human being I meet, including the people that openly, outwardly, they are not as great as seemingly I am. But the reason is, the Rebbe says, we all face temptations, and just like they give in to their temptation, I give in to them to my temptation. But in addition, when I give in to my temptation, I place myself way farther than where they are. Therefore, our sages tell us, declared, in regards to the illiterate, that deliberate sins are regarded in their case as inadvertent acts, since they are unaware of the gravity of their sins. In addition, the rabbi is pointing out another point. The rabbi says, yeah, look, it says don't steal, but the simple men who don't know the gravity of the sin, their punishment of the sin, the quality or the level of the sin, is like as if they did something without knowledge. But someone who knows the effect of the sin and how much it hurt someone whose goods were stolen from, when they committed thievery, their sin is a much, much graver, and therefore it takes a lot more to fix. With a scholar, the reverse is true. An oversight due to a lack of study is adjudged as being as grave as deliberate sin. Thus, his failure to restrain his evil impulse is indeed worse than the failure of a kal shebakalim. By contemplating this, the observant scholar will now be able to fulfill the instruction of the Mishnah quoted in the beginning of this chapter, be lowly of spirit before every man, lower than there. Thereby, he will crush his own spirit and the spirit of the Sitra Achra in his animal soul, enabling the light of his soul to permeate and irradiate his body, as explained in chapter 29. So that concludes chapter 30. In this chapter, we discovered the idea of humble, of humility, that we must be humble in front of every human being, and in fact, we should always consider ourselves lower than other human beings. Even though I go to synagogue every day and they go to synagogue only on Yom Kippur, it doesn't put me back on a higher scale, on a higher platform than they are. In fact, perhaps it's worse. I'm worse than they are. Chapter 31st, the rabbi is going to talk about how is it, if we do that, it may cause us to get depressed. And chapter 31st is going to be anti-depression. How do we fight depression? But until now, we discovered how to be able to allow the godly soul to rule and to allow the animal soul to be removed from our life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.